we do live in a society that we want a magic fix for things.
Totally.
We want a magic pill that takes something away. And I do look at how many people are running on fumes. So it's like you are completely exhausted. Maybe it's not physically, maybe it's mentally or emotionally because you're in the wrong marriage or you're in a bad marriage. You're in a really bad job or a really unhealthy, toxic work environment. You maybe have goals that you keep putting on the back burner. I want to go back to school. I want to get this degree, but I won't make time for it. All these things are going on. And all of these things are potentially fixable, or things that you could facilitate a solution or facilitate some sort of remedy. But instead, we sweep everything under the rug and then we just say, okay, just give me the anxiety pill because I don't want to have that tough conversation with my spouse. Or just, I'm going to keep muddling through it as long as I get the paycheck. And then as soon as I get home, I'm going to pour myself a glass of wine. So I think that that's sometimes where that negative thoughts of self-care come from, because instead of trying to move our, and it's difficult, solving problems when you know that there's red flags, and whether it's work or personal, that is never easy. But I do think that it is a better thing to take the steps forward to say, all right, I'm not going to be a martyr. I'm going to go ahead and have that tough conversation, or I'm going to go ahead and look for another job, or whatever the case is, as opposed to just saying, I'm just going to do these things and call it self-care, even though it's not, even though it's actually making those problems far worse.
My mom did that all my life. She spent her entire marriage mourning the loss of her brother, her mother, and her father silently. Didn't tell anybody that she was struggling with that or mental illnesses. And, my dad was just doing his thing and just not as emotionally invested in us. And so she did everything. And eventually all of that silent struggling and not taking care of yourself, it just ended up in her blowing up our family. And we're still working through that a year later. So I think it's important to not be the martyr and to take care of yourself, even if it does mean sacrificing other things.
I think the reason that people keep trudging along in those patterns is because the devil is less scary than the devil you don't. Yeah. And people are resigned to, I don't know what comes next. And that is so much more terrifying than knowing I will be miserable. I will continue to be unhealthy, unhappy, exhausted. At least I know what's coming. And I know that feeling. I remember that feeling about certain things in my life, and specifically a job that I was like, I can retire from this job. It's great. And going, well, at least I get the paycheck.
Yeah.
And finally, you have to get to a breaking point where you're like, I literally do not care what comes next. I just can't do this anymore. And it's easy to look in judgment at people that are walking this path, and you're like, God, why would you keep doing that? But I think if we really reflect, we've all been there in some capacity.
And I think one of the things is that people need to be honest with themselves. And that's the biggest important self-care you can do. You have to be honest, because if you, like Cassie mentioned, shoving things under the rug, you're just creating more ammunition, I would say. And when, like they say, when it blows up, it blows up. And you're putting yourself in that position where everything just crashes. You hurt yourself by doing that. So being honest is very important to yourself and to others as well, but mostly for yourself. Because if you go around living that kind of life of being somebody you're not, you're just, not only are you fooling yourself, you're fooling everybody else. And when things do come to light, then people just have, again, they have that judgment, they have that assumption, but most of all for you, you have that shame, you have that guilt. So I think it's important